All right, welcome everyone. Good evening. Glad that you could be with us here tonight for I think this is our ninth, 10th. Pam, straighten me out.
11th.
11th. Wow, time flies.
Yep.
This is our 11th speaker webinar. So thanks for joining us. If you have missed the previous ones, they are on our YouTube channel, and we'll drop that link in the chat here in a bit. So I hope that you'll check those out and share them if you feel there's value there. We are very, very blessed tonight to have, friend of mine, Dr. Matt Lampe. He is a great guy. I got to see him at PsyOp and hang out in real life. He does actually exist, which is always a plus. And so just a little bit about him. He is a change management analyst with Business Oregon as a PsyD in organizational development, and he focuses on the people side of change. In psychology is kind of what we do, right? He translates research into practical strategies that helps organizations and individuals adapt with agility. He also hosts the Science for Work podcast on evidence-based insights to help make work better. And Matt, if you would like sometime during this, if you want to drop the link, we'll be happy to share that as well. And with that, I will stop talking and hand it off. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, Lee, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of the webinar pop-up series. Today, we're talking about change management in motion, applying frameworks through human behavior. This session is really about how change management frameworks and change management models can give us structure, but they only work when people's behaviors make them real. And so what does that look like to actually apply those frameworks to really empower that change to happen and then to be sustained? So I know Lee went through a couple of the housekeeping notes, but I'll touch on them as well. If you are comfortable with your cameras being on, please turn them on. Because I'm doing the screen share right now, I can't see all the Zoom windows, but definitely if you're comfortable, turn them on. Enjoy and engage throughout the presentation. I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. So share any thoughts, any questions, do the emoji reactions anytime throughout. If you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. If you would rather ask it in person, do the little hand raise thing, and I'll invite you to come off mute. We can have that conversation and engage right there in real time. Otherwise, please, as Lee had said, please keep yourself on mute, and then we are recording. So if you do have the cameras on, go ahead and smile, keep that happy face going, and yeah, let's jump on in. So the other thing, feel free to throw your LinkedIn in the chat to connect with others. This is how we can connect while we learn. So feel free to share your name, where you're from, and any other information so that others can connect with you. So a little bit about me. So going all the way back to my undergrad, which I was thinking about this the other day, is coming up on 20 years, which is a little, doesn't feel that that's actually the case, but maybe it is. I was going all the way back to my undergraduate, when I was studying psychology, I was really drawn to the human side of things, the people side of work. I was taking psychology classes, but I didn't want to really go the counseling or the therapy route. I kept thinking, well, these are things that can apply to how the business world works. But I wasn't seeing that connection. I wasn't aware of it. And it wasn't until the very last class, or at least the last semester, where I learned about this thing called IO psychology. And it stuck with me. And I thought, I want to go back and I want to learn more about this, but let me go ahead and get some real world experience for a little bit. And so I thought, it'll just be a couple years. Ended up being about a 10-year stint working in financial services, investments, banking, relationship management, leadership management, working with some nonprofits, doing executive directing, went back, and then finally went back to get my master's in organizational behavior and my PsyD, so Doctor of Psychology in Organization Development. Now I focus on the people side of change. So really helping individuals and organizations adapt and pursue what they see as their greater potential by connecting some of these frameworks and some of these models of understanding how people navigate and how people go through how they engage with things that are changing around them, connecting that to real behaviors, mixing in coaching and different aspects of organizational psychology. My work really emphasizes readiness, response, and reinforcement as levers that can make change sustainable. As Lee was mentioning, I do work in the public sector, and I'm leading enterprise-wide change management for a large multi-year technology modernization initiative. A whole bunch of words to basically say, we are trying to get this aspect of public sector, our particular agency, moving forward with just an incredibly modern and up-to-date, very adaptive technology system and platform. And it's really exciting to be a part of the organization and the work that they're doing with that. In addition to leading it for that specific project, I'm also building out the organizational change management program for the entire agency, so it spans beyond specific projects and really just looks at how does the organization itself embed some of these change management practices, so that whether it's planned change or unplanned or unexpected change, people know how to adapt. People are able to continue to progress and have that continuous learning or that continuous evolving going on. Alongside my day-to-day work, as Lee had mentioned, I work with Science for Work. So I'm a director with Science for Work, and then I host the Science for Work podcast. I get to engage with different researchers and practitioners in conversations about evidence-based insights from IO psychology and HR management to help make work better. That's a little catch line that we use with every episode. So I also work with a local group here in the Portland, Oregon area, Pacific Northwest area, to provide pro bono consulting to local nonprofits, which is really, it's so much fun to be able to see some of this work impact communities in such a positive way. Let's see, I have a Substack that's listed right there that we call Don't Know Yet. And it did take a back burner for a little bit, but it's now one of my main outlets for writing. Both of these, Science for Work and Substack, are side projects that really help me explore the psychology of work, behavior, and really what it takes to grow through uncertainty, even when when the path ahead really isn't clear. And because not all of it's, because not all of it's professional here, there's also a picture of me doing one of my favorite things, which is camping in the mountains. And so anytime I can get outdoors, be among the trees, maybe have a glass of wine, that's what's in that picture, a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey sitting around the campfire, that's a good day. So, but enough about me. Let's move forward with what you actually came here for in the webinar that we're going to go through. So we're talking about change management in motion and applying those frameworks through human behavior. So where we'll go today, we'll start with frameworks as a tool. We're going to look at how different models can give us different lenses. From there, we'll move into a little bit of a conversation around fit and context. Then we'll go into behavior as the enabler. So again, going back to that readiness, the response, and the reinforcement aspect of it. We'll talk about some micro tools that you can use right away, and then we'll bring it all together with hopefully some sticky takeaways. I'll try to keep this interactive, ask for thoughts and reflections and input along the way. So again, please feel free to post questions in the chat. Lee, I'm going to actually ask you to help me out. If you see comments or questions come in the chat, let me know. Because again, I don't see all the screens there. And then same thing, if somebody raises their hand and I don't catch it right away, if you could just let me know, I'd appreciate that. All right, so let's start with a common question that I've heard that I get asked especially when I say, oh yeah, I work in change management. For those that don't know what it is, the first question is usually, what does that mean? And then once they understand a little bit, or those that are familiar, they ask, what evidence-based change management model works best? So I'm actually going to put this out to all of you. So put it in the chat, raise your hand, come off mute. Go ahead, actually, yeah, just go ahead and come off mute and start answering. If you are familiar with any change management models, what model works best? I'm going to give a few more seconds. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd almost say, Matt, that it kind of depends upon what you're doing for the client and what you need to do.
Dr. Pam, it's like you saw my notes, and if we were in person, you'd be getting that gold star because it depends. And so if you've studied IO psychology or you've worked in change or you've listened to the Work Cookie podcast, you've heard the answer multiple times, you've heard the statement multiple times, it depends. Because it does, and exactly what you're saying there. It depends on the people, it depends on the context, whether behaviors actually support the framework and whether the framework supports the people. That's kind of our focus today is, taking a look at that and saying, well, if it's not that one model works best and it really is, it depends, what does that look like? All right, so the second part, that second question then would be, out of the change management models that it might depend which one might work best, do you have one that you reach for most often? All right, and there's enough time for that awkward pause. And again, the answer comes back to it depends. So there's a lot of frameworks that are out there, a lot of models that are out there, and each brings a different lens to change. Some emphasize change at an individual level, so focusing on an individual adoption. Others look at organizational alignment. Some highlight the psychology of transitions. So for example, ADKAR zeroes in on individuals, and it looks at awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. Bridges helps us understand identity and transition, how people are letting go of something or how they're embracing something new. Cotter emphasized leadership momentum. Lewin gives us that classic unfreeze, change stuff, and then refreeze at foundation. McKinsey and Litwin look at systematically at alignment, and even concepts like nudge theory, which had its origins in behavioral and economics, that can remind us that small behavioral cues can really make a big difference. And the key point is not to memorize every model, it's to see them as that tool set. Each is valid, each is useful and has use, but which one you choose really just depends on the context and the people that are involved. So let's go through a case example or a hypothetical situation that for this is hypothetical, but in reality right now, this is something that a lot of organizations are experiencing. So imagine an organization announces that employees must return to the office 3 days a week. So on paper, leadership frames this as a way to strengthen collaboration and rebuild culture. But employees might be framing it a little differently. There's a loss of flexibility. There's an added burden of commuting that they haven't had to do anymore. There's even maybe that threat to that work-life balance that they feel like maybe they finally found during that remote work period. The policy is clear, the what of the change is defined, but the how really depends on the behavior. So that same policy can land in two very different contexts. For leaders, it's about unity. For employees, maybe it's a sense of loss. And that's, again, comes back to why that context matters so much for change practitioners. So when you're working with an organization, when I'm working with an organization and they say, well, this is our new change initiative, we're bringing everybody back. There's not one model that's going to really address that, because if we only look at it through one lens, we're only going to be addressing part of that problem or part of that challenge. A model like Bridges can help us see the psychological transition component, but unless we also understand how people are framing that change, the framework really misses the mark. So, we can, again, Bridges is one of the models that I tend to bring in often, but it's not always the only one. And so if we were to apply Bridges' transition model, it would help us see the psychological journey. There's the endings, the neutral zone, and that new beginning. And that's really useful to understand where people are in that process. But if it's the only model, it really risks oversimplifying. And the model explains the stages, but it doesn't show us how to address those structural barriers. Like, again, maybe some of the frustrations that people are experiencing is that new commute time, or reinforcing some of those desired behaviors over months. You can roll out this initiative and maybe people are on board for the first few weeks. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of energy around that. But over time, if that's not sustained, if other models of change aren't brought in to continue that sustained component of it, you risk it fading back and people falling back into their old habits. So in this situation, in practice, we'd likely want to blend models. Bring in, whether it's, again, I'm going to say it now for the third time, Bridges. If we brought in Bridges for understanding where people are with that transition piece, maybe we also bring in something like ADKAR or Cotter's 8 steps to really track readiness, build momentum, and reinforce over time. We might even borrow from nudge theory and introduce some small cues or reminders to help those new routines stick. The point of all that is that context determines which tools belong in the mix and when. And when you go into a project or a change initiative, or you're working with an organization, to say that this is the one model we are going to use really leaves a lot on the table. And so you come in with this toolbox and you say, I'm not sure yet. Again, going back to that earlier slide and that earlier question, it depends. So if we were to look at another case example, another situation that I have recently had conversations with different organizations around. Let's say there's a longtime executive that's retiring after 20, 25 years, right? Not only are they on an individual level going through transition of their own, their day-to-day routine is going to be completely different. Their meaning and their and intent and mindset, all those things are going to be changing. When you look at the organization, they're probably leaving behind a leadership gap. No matter how much succession planning you've done, there's going to be some sort of leadership gap that is experienced. They're also likely leaving around an entire culture that has been shaped around how they operate. So their incoming leader, whoever follows them, arrives with energy, with vision, with a mandate for change, whether they recognize it or not. We want more collaboration, more transparency, more innovation. But that context is going to be layered. Employees may carry loyalty to that old leader, and as much as they don't want that person to retire, the reality of it is they are retiring. And so as a change management practitioner, one of the things you're looking at is how are people addressing and responding to that? Are all of a sudden the employees that have been here for 15, 20 years, are they starting to maybe look at the door themselves? Are they, if they've only been here for a few years, are they saying, you know what, I'd rather go to another organization? And they may not talk out loud about it, and they may not overtly display behaviors that are easy to spot, but that's where you, as that change management professional, that IO psychology practitioner, being able to read and understand those situations and acknowledge and see and have a sense of where people are. Employees, they may have that sense of identity that's tied to how things have always been done, and there's some uncertainty about what transparency or innovation can really mean for them. So if we were to apply, let's say, McKinsey's 7S framework, it can help us see how there's an alignment challenge, maybe with strategy, structure, strategy, structure, system, skills, style, staff, and shared values. But and how those things line up in order for that cultural shift to succeed. And that's a powerful organizational lens to look through. That's a powerful model to apply and be able to identify or track and measure how are people responding to this change, how successful is this. But again, if it's the only model applied, it really can leave out that human dynamic. How are people responding? Are they resisting? Are they reinforcing new ways of working? Are they part of building that so that there's a shared ownership, or is it something that's being told to them? Voluntold change versus volunteered change, engaged in empowered change versus mandated to them. So again, it comes back to, in practice, we'd likely need a mix of all these different pieces. Cotter's 8 steps to build urgency and leadership momentum, nudge theory to reinforce micro behaviors to create some of those cultural changes. Each framework can bring a different lens, but only by combining them or having them all available, having a general understanding of when this might be appropriate or when this might work. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the best, because the reality of it is you might not know that it's the best until you've applied some of it or you've started to look through it with that lens. Each framework can bring that different lens, but it's through combining them and it's through modifying them and applying them through that behavior standpoint that you can really start to see, in this particular example, culture change taking root, leadership, that leadership transition having a sustainable and a successful implementation. Are the employees, is the organization following that leader? Not just because they are in that title, but because they believe in their message. And if you have somebody that was there for 20 plus years and now they're gone, there's a number of different factors and components that are now all of a sudden needing to be taken into consideration. And that's where we come in as IO psychology practitioners, as change management practitioners, having that understanding to say, what lens makes sense in this moment? Okay. So with all of that, here's kind of that key idea. Frameworks
Matt,
don't
before
necessarily...
you get too far, there's a question in the chat.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Danielle asked, for different cases, is it always beneficial to do a mixed method, or are there cases where one method is enough?
Ooh. I try to avoid absolutes like always and never. And I'm sure that there are situations where one method could be enough. But in my experience, I have yet to come across a situation where I've walked into a project or into a situation expecting to only have one. And I can think of a conversation that I had with a leader. They said, "Well, what change method are we using?" And it took a lot of back and forth for them to understand. I'm not sure. I don't know yet. Like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean you don't know yet? You're supposed to be the change management person. I'm going, exactly. But if you go to the doctor and you say, what medicine should I take? I don't know. I don't know what's going to make sense to you. So for different cases, my mindset is expecting that it's going to be some sort of mixed method. And again, I have yet to come across one where only one method is enough. I might lean heavily on one versus another, but up till this point in my experience, it's always it has come back to being some sort of mixed method where multiple factors are being considered, whether they're intentionally or explicitly ingrained, or whether it's maybe that's something that's part of our organizational psychology lens, where we bring some of those factors in, whether we recognize it as a change model or not. I don't know, Danielle, did that help answer that?
Danielle's got her hand up.
Yeah, it definitely did. I think it just led to more questions. Like in the case where like you were brought in to consult and they're asking what method you're going to use, it sounds like this leader maybe already knew some change management methods. So it sounds like maybe there was some overcoming that, maybe a little bit of education, and maybe I'm making some assumptions, but here. But I'm also curious, like, how do you end up having like those conversations with those leaders of, you know what, I don't know what it is yet. Because I feel like sometimes you get hit with a lot of resistance or reluctance of, why did I bring you in? Or you have to do more diagnosis like a doctor, like in your case. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So in that example where the leader was saying, well, which model are you going to use? And my answer was, it depends. And again, that back and forth, they had a general understanding of some change models. Part of that was because their background happened to be in project management. And so there are some, when you talk project management mindset, or you talk with people that are very technical with project management, the phrase change management might have a very different meaning to them. And that's where understanding, there's a phrase that I've used, that I use frequently. The meaning of your communication is the result you are getting. So I might say to them, well, there's all sorts of change management models. And what I'm saying is, I don't know which of the tools I'm going to use out of the toolbox. But what they're hearing is, I know one or two change management models because I'm a project management experienced person, and in project management we know of this one and this one. And so it's through those questions, and when they respond back saying, well, no, we need you to pick one, I'm going, well, which ones are you familiar with? What is it that you like about that? What are some strengths? What are some gaps that one doesn't cover? And then all of a sudden that's where, in those questions, they may not have the answer, but they start to see, okay, here's maybe the value of why we did bring you in, and here's why you aren't able to give us that example. And then rather than turning it into a lecture of me saying, well, let me walk you through 15 different change management models that you're going to fall asleep halfway through the first one because this isn't, maybe your area of expertise or your jam, it becomes the other way of saying, I can tell you how the watch is built, or I can tell you what time it is. Which information are you wanting? And so again, through that questions, and you're right, we're master question askers. When we ask those questions, we can help identify and understand a little bit more, how is this message landing? How is it being received? And so in that particular example, what we ended up an outcome that we ended up coming to was, we settled on, here's a model that you're familiar with. Here's a model that I'm familiar with, but I understand it's probably not going to be the only one that I'm going to use. But if it works, if it makes sense for you and it works to get that message communicated in terms of being able to show progress along the way throughout this project of how are people responding to change, then maybe we use that as the anchor where I frame these other components. When I bring in McKinsey and Cotter and Lewin, I frame it in that ADKAR model because you're familiar with ADKAR. So now all of a sudden it's saying, how can we find a way to make sure that as we go through this, the message is landing as I'm intending, and you're understanding in a format, in a framework, in a model that you know. And so it's still blending all of those methods, it's mixing them together, but then at the outcome, I'm going, okay, how is this message going to land with them? They're familiar with ADKAR, let's use ADKAR for reporting. And so then all of a sudden you end up modeling or molding, kind of like clay, you end up molding that model to meet them where they are. Did that help answer, Danielle?
Yep,
got a
that was
thumbs up.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. So again, the key, I love those questions. And again, the key idea is that frameworks don't necessarily move on their own. Contexts are going to constantly shift, that whether that's new leaders or shifting priorities, technology rollouts, evolving expectations, voluntary change, voluntold change, all these different components that when you start looking at from a system level, it's like back and forth between an individual level for how are people responding and navigating through change, but then how is the system supporting that, reinforcing it, or even maybe causing some friction. It's when those contexts shift, people either are going to adapt or they're going to resist. That's primarily one of two ways to look at it. And I recognize that we can actually have a whole philosophical conversation about how there's a spectrum of ways that people react. But for me, I look at it initially, at least from that onset of people are either going to adapt to it or they're going to resist. Now that's not set in stone. We can absolutely modify it along the way, but that's where I can start to look at, okay, if people do fall into the adapting, people are adapting to it, great. How do we reinforce that? How do we continue to make sure that they continue to adapt? If they're resisting, how do we address that in a way that we can navigate some of those challenges, respond to it, hear what's actually a point of friction for them, because their experience might be different than what I was assuming their experience was. All this to say, a single model might give us a helpful lens, but rarely is it going to be that full picture. And so, that's why we as change practitioners, we keep multiple models in mind. They're like tools in that toolbox. There's that picture that we've used on a couple different slides. ADKAR can help diagnose where readiness is weakest. Cotter might remind us to build urgency or celebrate some of those short-term wins to keep people in that adaptive phase. How adaptive are they? Are they strong advocates and they're leading the charge? Cool. Keep reinforcing that. Are they somewhere in between? They're going, oh, you know what? I'm along for the ride and I'm still not sure yet. McKinsey's 7S can help highlight where systems and cultures may be out of alignment or start to get out of alignment, because again, as it continues to evolve, those shifts are going to continue to come up. And so it's almost like herding cats. And interestingly enough, I keep seeing your cat come across the window, and that's awesome. I love that, because that's where I thought of that. It's like the cats, you have every intention for things to go a certain way, but they're going to move around, and having all these different lenses are really going to, McKinsey's, for example, McKinsey 7S can help highlight where some of those systems and cultures start to get out of alignment, and then you're able to sort of corral them back together. Behavioral insights like nudge theory can help start introducing some of those micro habits or micro reinforcements to sustain that progress, something where it can start setting expectation. People default their behavior to the new system or to the new way of working or to the new operation, whatever that new change, that new output might be. The point isn't to pick one model and stick with it until it breaks. It's for us as practitioners to stay adaptive, weaving between models as the situation evolves, using whichever lens can help us better understand what people need at that moment. Because today, one person might be all on board, all in, gung-ho, woohoo, here we go. And tomorrow, there could be a number of different factors that maybe their experience is a little bit different. So that's where we as practitioners, the more that we stay adaptive, we're able to understand and recognize see through those lenses where people are in that moment, and then adapt in that moment to meet them. Frameworks give us that structure, but they only flex when the behaviors bring them to life. And that's why change management is, and here's one of the few times I will use the word always, change management is always in motion because people are always in motion. And the bigger picture, every time people adapt to a specific change, they're also building agility and the capacity to handle whatever comes next. So adaptation, adapting in the moment. Adaptation is the moment. Adaptation in the moment grows agility for the future. So it grows into that agility component where, think of it like rather than trying to help people change a specific component, you're helping them learn and helping them understand how to change at all. All right, let's see here. Okay, so I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, a little bit of like, that zooming in and zooming back out. There's a lot of that I end up doing throughout my day because, again, you want to see where are people at on an individual level, but then how's the organization looking at this? So when we zoom in on behavior, when we talk about the people side of change, it can sort of feel abstract. It's like, well, that sounds great. I like that phrase, but I don't really know what that means or what that actually looks like. So in practice, it can show up in 3 levers that really matter. First is going to be that readiness. And this is about that awareness and that desire component. Do people understand what's changing and why? Sometimes it's voluntary, and by voluntary, I mean an organization has set out, we are going to pursue this change. Other times it's not always voluntary, and it's not always well in advance. Think of 2020. That was a change that happened pretty quickly, and so that readiness component, maybe people aren't ready for that specific piece and they don't understand what's changing, and maybe they understand a little bit of why. But when you're looking at that readiness components, do they understand what's changing and why? Do they feel motivated, or do they see the benefits of adapting? Without that readiness piece, you can't really expect meaningful engagement, or at least sustained meaningful engagement. People simply aren't prepared to take that first step. And that's, again, where it comes back to, as change practitioners, if we're working on a specific project, we have very clear timelines, very clear outputs or outcomes that we're seeking to reach. But when we're looking at maybe something that's not on a specific project or initiative, we're saying, well, we're building change readiness, change management throughout the organization, how people are continuously able to be ready for change, whether they expect it or not. That's that adaptability piece. The second behavior that really matters, one of the levers when on the people side of change, that is second piece, is that response. This is the lived experience in the transition. So how are people coping with uncertainty, with loss, or with a learning curve that comes with change? Are they engaged? Are they frustrated? Are they anxious? Are they curious? The whole list of their mindset through that change can be very wide. And responses aren't just emotional. They do show up in behaviors. So maybe this means that all of a sudden somebody is skipping meetings that they normally are early in attending. Maybe there's some experimenting with new processes, quietly reverting back to the old way. You get this thing called shadow systems start creeping in, where it's like, I don't like doing it that way, so I'm going to take this back road. And how are people responding and doing? Are they practicing what we are trying to implement, or are they reverting back? And are we catching those signals? As practitioners, we have to be able to read those signals and then adjust that support in real time. That's where, when we're zooming in on that individual level, and sometimes that's hard to do in a large organization, even in a medium-sized organization of a couple hundred people, it's not always possible to be able to zoom in on an individual level. But if you have these different feelers out there to where you can pull some of that information, those little senses, those sensors, those beacons, you can start to identify some of those signals. And the earlier that you're able to identify those signals, hopefully you're able to start bringing in those different components of different models to start bringing in that other tool to lead into what's the third lever here, reinforcement. And this is what sustains that behavior after the initial push. So we've all seen, and we probably can all think of changes that have been announced and launched. A lot of effort and initiative, a lot of money maybe goes into it with an organization, and then 6 weeks later or 3 months later, it's pretty much fallen flat. and eventually it disappears because nothing was there to reinforce it. So from an organization's standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, when you're talking with leaders and they're saying, well, but we want to do this initiative and it's going to cost us a lot of money. There's an opportunity for an ROI conversation, return on investment. You're saying, well, you're putting a lot of money in this. You want to make sure that it's reinforced, that 6 months from now, that new system that you just dumped a whole bunch of time, energy, and resources into, that people are continuing to use it. And reinforcement can happen through a number of different ways. Sometimes it's through recognition or accountability. Sometimes it's embedding the change into systems and cultures. Without having multiple points of reinforcement based off of what makes sense or what you understand, what you as the practitioner have picked up as signals, this might work, this might not. And again, you don't always know. There's a bit of trial and error sometimes. In theory, something sounds great, but in practice, again, people are always changing. Without all those different reinforcement options, and without all that reinforcement going in, people are likely to slip back into their old ways of doing things. Not because, maybe it's because they're unwilling, but not always. Sometimes it's because old habits are strong and new ones need that support to stick. Think of, how many people start on January 1, I'm going to go to the gym. And by January 15th, instead of going every day, you're now down to like 3 days. But hey, I'm still going. By February 15th, if you ever want to join a gym, go in like February or March, because everybody who had the whole new year, new me, they're usually done going to the gym by March because that reinforcement piece isn't there. So what does it look like to build some of that reinforcement around that to make sure that those habits are sustained, and that when you see those small wins, you're celebrating them, you're acknowledging them, you're recognizing them to keep that momentum going. And for some people, that recognition component is going to be a huge motivation. For others, maybe not. That's where you as the practitioner, it's not, we must do it this way because I read a research paper that said this works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Together, that readiness, that response, and that reinforcement create the conditions for that adaptation. And one of the lessons that I learned early on, and I continue to be reminded by it, one of the most important connections, even the most technically accurate model can fall short if those behavioral levers aren't addressed, that readiness, response, and reinforcement. Again, it comes back to models give us that structure. And we want to be familiar with the models, but we don't want to lean into it as the absolute truth or as the only one that works. Models give us that structure, but it's these human factors that keep that change alive and keep that change sustained. And so we as organizational psychology people, as change management people, part of the job is to know the tool, but it's the people side that really is going to make it last. I see we're getting close on time, so I'm going to try to move through these so we can get to some Q&A here at the end. So the 3 micro tools that really keep change in motion, no matter what framework you use. First, scan for gaps. Whatever model you prefer, ADKAR, Cotter, McKinsey, Lewin, each has components that can get overlooked. So use the model like a checklist and ask yourself, what's missing here? What works well in this particular model, and when might I want to bring it in? So for example, maybe the structure is aligned, but the reinforcement is absent in that model. Maybe urgency is built, but systems never change. Continuing to scan for gaps can keep you from assuming that progress is even. Because oftentimes it's not. There's going to be different people at different levels, different processes at different levels, and you're continuing to scan to say what's missing in this lens that I'm looking at right now. The second is stage the journey. Change isn't just about tasks and milestones, it's about people moving through those transitions. So this could mean thinking in phases. Again, when you go to Lewin's unfreeze, change, and refreeze. Or maybe it's thinking in steps with Cotter's model, or thinking in psychological stages with change curves models, whatever it might be. Whatever the framework, ask yourself, where are people in the journey right now? And this kind of helps you meet them with the right kind of support for where they are. And the more that you have those signals and those change champions or whatever it might be, where you're able to identify, we have some people here, we have some people there, you can start to provide some of those resources using those models. Hey, this model might work here, or this component of that model might work there. You can start to implement those things, introduce those things to sort of meet this group where they are while still meeting this other group where they are. And the third is behavior checkpoints. Models often look neat on paper, but the proof is in the behavior. So when you hit certain milestones, take a moment and pause and reflect and ask, what are people actually doing? Are they using the new system that we're introducing? Are managers reinforcing this new behavior or this new culture or this new practice? Are the new habits visible? If not, it doesn't necessarily matter what if the step was completed, it doesn't sound like it's translated into sustained behavior. If the only purpose is to check the box, you can check the box. 6 months from now, I'd be willing to bet that box will no longer stay checked. So it's having those checkpoints to say, what are people actually doing, and are they using this new process, or their behaviors changing in a way that reinforces their engagement, their relationship with whatever that change is. These tools aren't designed or aren't tied. They're not designed to cover everything. They're not tied to any one model. They help you adapt whichever model you're using and help keep it flexible, help keep it context aware, and really, again, coming back to keeping it people-centered, people-focused. Okay. So the big picture of what we've been building, what we've been building toward, and I could absolutely, I mean, obviously looking at the time, I could go into great detail for a lot longer, but I was trying to keep things at a surface level, and I would absolutely welcome and encourage continuing conversations. So the big picture of kind of what we're building forward, think of frameworks as like a blueprint. They're important. They give us structure, they give us sequence, they give us language. But if you've ever looked at a blueprint, it's just lines on a page. The blueprint doesn't build the house. What builds the house are the people, the behavior. It's the readiness to show up, the response in that messy middle, and the reinforcement that makes those new routines or those new practices stick. That's the hammer, that's the nail, that's the daily work that turns those lines on paper into something you can actually live in. And when structure and behavior come together, that creates that adaptation. That is adaptation. Suddenly, the return to office mandate isn't just about a policy anymore. It's managers modeling that flexibility. Managers acknowledging, you know what, I had to change my routine too, and it's a learning curve. I'm not totally on board with it, but I'm learning, and I'm modeling that flexibility piece. Teams are finding new rhythm. That adaptability is commuters maybe building new routes again, or adjusting their timing on when they leave the office, whatever it might be, and having that ability to adapt and say, okay, in order for us to have this outcome, here are these other things that will change in order to support that. When we look, with the leader, the CEO retiring, and that culture change piece, it's not just a memo from leadership. It's how are employees experimenting with that transparency? How are they experiencing it? Are they testing that new collaboration that this new CEO says he wants to introduce? Are they slowly creating new norms that support it, or are those new norms supporting something else? And the sooner that you can identify that and address it by asking questions, you're able to start creating that adaptation. And the really powerful part of that, every time people adapt to a change like that, that's where they're also building agility. And I know that this is about change management, not agility, but a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the research that I've done has been around agility and the key factors that enable it. So apologies, I can't help but throw that in there. So the next time, and what does agility mean? It means that, if there's a change that they have expected and they know about, how are they engaging with that? But really, that's the adaptation piece. The next part, that agility, those are future changes. So the next time a curveball comes, the next time a change initiative comes, whatever it is, they've already practiced that adapting, that adjusting. So are you reinforcing their ability, their skill set to navigate whatever change comes up, whether it's planned, unplanned, voluntary, voluntold? If they've already been practicing that adjusting, then they are more likely to be able to navigate those future changes with less friction and with more skill, with more ease. Adaptation in the moment is like a workout for that future resilience. So it's not just a neat equation on a slide. It's really, this is really the story of change itself. Frameworks guide us, behaviors make it real, adaptation solves for today, and then agility can prepare us for that tomorrow. Okay. Being mindful of time, I'm actually, let me see here if I can, we'll go through this. So we've looked at a few different stories, the return to office shift, leader in transition, culture change, things like that. In each case, we saw how one framework can give us that helpful lens, but it's, again, never the full story. So I want take a moment and think about a change that maybe you've seen or you've been a part of. Maybe it was at school or at work, outside of work, a new system, a new leader, a new policy, new way of doing things. What framework do you instinctively reach for first? Maybe it's leaning toward ADKAR, scanning for gaps in awareness and reinforcement. Maybe it's Cotter, thinking about urgency and short-term wins, or Lewin with the simplicity of unfreeze, change, and refreeze. Maybe it's transition models, alignment models, behavior first approaches, all sorts of different frameworks that maybe we lean toward instinctively, we reach for them first. Here's the real pivot, or here's the real opportunity for us. Once you've chosen your starting framework, how do you adapt it as you progress? How do you adapt it through behavior, through observation? In the return to office example, maybe it's realizing that the policy is clear. It's very clear, and the text is black and white, but the readiness is low. So you're adjusting it by building some more of that desire component. In the leadership model, or in the leadership example, maybe it's realizing that the systems are very much in alignment, but the people's responses are hesitant. And so you're focusing on visible reinforcement. So when you think about, what is your go-to framework, add the second piece. How might you flex that to fit the people, to fit in the moment, to meet people where they are? How do you adapt it through that behavior that you're observing as that change practitioner, as that organizational psychology practitioner? So wrapping it up so we can get to the Q&A, bringing those kind of threads together, we started with that simple question: what change management model works best? And the classic IO answer: it depends. When we explore how different frameworks give us structure, give us order, give us language, they help us see a situation or a scenario or an environment from multiple angles. And that can help us bring it to life. When those frameworks plus behavior, that's how we get that adaptation piece. That's when change becomes real in the moment. It might look good on paper, but if it doesn't translate to how is this responding and engaging with how people are behaving, you run the risk of it not being sustained. So with everything we've talked about, and again, I'm excited to get to the Q&A, so I'll speed through this part here. If you just take one thing with you today, let it be this: frameworks guide us, but behavior enables adaptation. And that's what sustains change. And every adaptation today is also an investment in our agility tomorrow. And that's change management in motion. It's not just for this specific initiative or this specific project. It's how are you able to navigate and adapt to change, sometimes when there's no playbook, sometimes when it comes out of the blue. How are you responding to that versus reacting to that? And again, the frameworks guide us, the behavior enables that adaptation, which is what sustains change and builds for the future. All right, so let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. My email is also there. I'm happy to have conversations with people. I enjoy having these kind of conversations. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your experience, what resonated for you with this, what feels most applicable in your own work or in your own studies. And with that, I would love to open it up to some questions, and I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see everybody's face, see if everybody's stuck with us.
So
All right.
Danielle has another great question, which I actually have rummaging in my head. The resources of the books that you would recommend, for us that may want to know more, dig more, add more floating information in our head that maybe use to do it.
So to make sure I understood, it was what books and resources? Okay.
Yeah.
I should have. Oh, I did. Oh, look at me. I'm smart. I kept them up here. This is one that I haven't started reading yet, but and it's not change management, but it's people analytics. Cole Napper doing a little PR promo there. Managing Transitions by William Bridges. So William Bridges has just an incredible book. He and so William Bridges and Susan Bridges. They actually have two books, but this is the one it's the orange book. There's an orange book and a blue book. I'm going to unblur my background here. So this is one of them, and it's got a little butterfly there. It's a fantastic book about that bridges transition model where people are in terms of letting something is there. There's a sense of loss and letting that go, and then the neutral zone, and then how are they embracing that? And what I love about that is he talks about it's not linear. It's not like you go step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. People are going to experience that at different times, and sometimes it's going to be overlapping. And so this is a fantastic resource for that. The other one that I have gone back to multiple times, it is very technical. It is a textbook. Is Organizational Change, an Action-Oriented Toolkit. Causey, Deska, and Ingalls, big, thick, giant textbook. I'll make sure I can put both of those in the chat here as well. Those are the research heavy ones, or the technical model heavy ones. But there's also a lot of books that talk about. So let's see, there's Shift that I just recently read that talks about how people respond, and the framework that they use, the mindset they use is shifting through different changes. I've got this bookshelf back here has probably half a dozen different books that are in that realm. I'll put them together on in a list, and we can send that out.
Well, I have a question myself, Matt, but I'll see if anybody else has one before I pop in with mine. And so, and I've got one of the books going in the chat. So my question is probably a little bit more historical, philosophical.
Mm-hmm. Ooh,
so
fun.
So as you were talking about using parts and pieces of the models, using them as checklists, do some of these model makers, in a sense, because some of them are still around, have they realized that their models are not just, succinct things that are only used for that one individual little purpose? So it comes back to what was their thought process in the what's and the whys of what drove them to build that particular model. Like I said, it's more philosophical, probably.
Yeah, I like that question, and I wish that I have had more conversations with some of these model creators. A lot of my understanding is I've read through them and learned a little bit more, not only about the model, but about the individual people. I think that every bit of it is shared or drafted, designed, and then validated, tested, things like that with good intention, but it's a very narrow focus. And that doesn't mean that it's not valid, that it's not rigorous or applicable. But if we only look at it through that, we're missing so much of it. The other thing, when it comes to adapting, this is how I choose to look at it as a practitioner, is these individuals have taken the time to dive very extensively deep into how this component or that component can be used. And I'm trying to think of a non-change management example, but I'll just bring it in as change management. Let's go with ADKAR, for example. That's a ProPsy project management framework, and you can get ProPsy certified. Full disclosure, I'm not. I don't have that certification, but I've looked at that model. I've read through that model. I've studied it for a long time, enough to know here's what it looks at. And really, the reality of it is it's designed for an individual type use. But again, there are situations where maybe somebody, a project management team, is very familiar with that model, but they want it to be their expectation or their hope is that it can represent an organizational level versus an individual. Okay, so we can use different components of that model and modify it a little bit so that it lands in the language that they understand. But when it comes back to your question of, the people that have created this, I don't know the answer to that. I would love to have those conversations to say, do you see this as the absolute, or how does this fit in? everything I've shared today is how I've applied it and how I've fitted in like different puzzle pieces, but I would love to hear from them how they do that. Now you've got me thinking who can I reach out to try and find those answers.
Well, I have another question that kind of builds off of something that you kind of just said. Have you built your own model from scratch to use with the client going, there's too many parts and pieces here for me to fit together. I'm just going to create mine because it's quicker, it's easier, and I already have that visual in my head.
The short answer is yes. But I won't go for the long answer. I'll go for the slightly longer version of short, and I'll say, yes, I did, but majority of it was bits and pieces from others' models. I didn't set out and say, and I would love to. I've dabbled in that thought a little bit, but I hesitate bringing that into practice or into application without having any evidence-based validity or rigor to that, because I respect these models there are a lot of models out there,
yes,
that I think may be well intended, but don't have that scientific validity and that rigor. And so I do limit the tools that are in my toolbox to things that have that scientific backing. And so when it comes to have I created my own? Yes, but it's been a blend of still holding that standard and then putting those together.
Yeah.
Big long-term picture, man, that would be fun to create one and then go through the validity and the testing on that. But I don't know when that'll happen.
So Danielle's got a really good question. What models come to mind that you don't recommend due to that lack of validity?
So my reservation on answering is I try not to downplay or talk negatively about models or people or their theories and their practices. In part because unless I've had a conversation with them to understand their reasoning behind it, there's still a lot of unknowns. And instead, rather I focus on, well, what are the ones that I have seen, have read about, have learned about, and can find value in that. I know that's not an answer to your question. I definitely sidestep that one. But that's usually my approach is rather than blasting certain models that drive me up the wall, focusing on here are the ones that actually have some value and some benefit that I recommend, hey, if there's an opportunity to bring this in, go for it. So I know that definitely didn't answer it. What I would suggest,
go ahead, Anika. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead and finish.
I was going to say, what I would suggest, if you come across a change model and you're going, I wonder, do a quick Google search, type in that change model, and then right after it, type in scientific validity. And odds are you'll get some responses that you'll be able to fairly quickly identify this has some backing, or oh wow, here's some strong critique on these. And then use that with caution, because even some that don't have the scientific validity and the evidence-based or the rigor, they may still have some sort of value. It's just being very careful how you interpret that and how you apply that.
Go ahead, Anika.
Yes, so I guess I have a question regarding all of this. In theory sounds really great, but like I work for a state agency and it seems like the change is thought on high and just sent down to HR and the employees with no foresight or thought of any of this at all. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering, any recommendations on how to help guide, influence, so it is more of a well thought about, change process versus kind of here, I thought of this, now go do it. And then it's just kind of like, okay.
Yeah. I can absolutely relate to you on the state agency and not really having this type of framework in place in public sector. It is something that unfortunately is still there's still a tremendous opportunity to introduce it. A lot of state and public sector organizations have not yet embraced this or have not implemented this. I would say that over the next few years, I really do see it leaning, bringing that in. But it may, even when it's brought in, it may still be one person or two people for the entire state agency. And it's like, oh, wow, that's a lot. So whether it's in that formal capacity or whether it's not, because, hey, we just don't have that role, but I would love to see some of this brought in, having that, depending on what your role is in the organization and the relationship that may exist with leadership, with management, with program directors, agency directors, HR, having those conversations to just, again, coming back to those questions saying, hey, have we looked at this? Have we wondered, what checkpoints do we have in place? What benchmarks do we have in place 3 months after this is announced to see how are people responding to it? Even just asking those questions, there may be answers. Oh, we've got X, Y, and Z put in place to check that. But I would bet more often than not, it's, oh, that's a good point. We haven't thought of that. And then maybe the door opens a little to, how would we do that? Well, not sure. Let's start looking at this together. And that's where it comes into being able to approach it, not with certainty that, well, I know this solution or this procedure is going to be absolute, but opening up to those questions. How do we check where people are in this process?
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, any other lasting questions before we end for the evening?
And I'll extend the invitation again. Please feel free to connect with me, whether that's through email or through LinkedIn. Would love to continue these conversations and help, whether it's ask questions, share resources, share insights. This is my jam. I love these kind of conversations and being able to learn together. And so please feel free to connect, ask questions, and let's keep it going.
Thank you, Matthew. This was very good. I even had a few things, rumble in my head. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this, and beyond just this, thank you for putting this together. 11 is pretty tremendous, and I'm excited to see more coming going forward.
Yes, Matt, thank you. And it's also awesome that we have 2 of our previous speakers here in the room as well. So that's awesome as well. Thank you so much for all of you for coming. You're the reason we do this. Just a reminder, please answer the survey. If you have ideas, you can reach out to me, to Pam, to Arlene. We're happy to hear it. This is, it's a labor of love. We learn every time we do this, and we've had the opportunity to have some people that I personally didn't know, but were amazing to listen to. So again, thank you, Matt. Thanks for being here. Thank all of you, and we will hopefully see you this time next month.
Matt, can you hang on